So again, on the day that I'm doing this, obviously, this is some of my pre-video holiday recordings that I'm doing still. But obviously, we had the big announcement about national service being re-announced by Rishi Sunak in an attempt to try and sway the youth vote over to the Conservatives. Um, Needless to say, obviously the way that this is being sold, especially on the morning press rounds, has gone down absolutely like a lead balloon. Now, one of the things and one of the places, if you know my channel, we cover a lot of conservative home. And maybe the reason why we cover conservative home, because I have to re-stress why we do this every single time almost, I feel, is that conservative home in particular has a very, very big pull over the non-parliamentary party. So when you talk about the Conservative Party, there is the Westminster part of the party, that's all its MPs, and then there is the non-parliamentary party, just as the exact same of any other political party. And the non-party has a significant pull, especially when it comes to sort of leadership elections or things like that. And we have seen time and time again that Conservative Home has got the mood right of the non-parliamentary political party. So it has rightly predicted the past couple of leadership elections. It will probably accurately predict the next ones. But needs to say, it is a very valuable resource when you're looking into sort of the mind of what is going on in the non-parliamentary Conservative Party, or at least what the feelings are of that particular part of the party. That's why we do it. And of course, from time to time, they themselves get incredibly angry at the party, disheartened, stick up for the party, even though many of these people maybe a week ago or the week after will write an either positive or negative piece about the thing that they've just written last week. Like I say, it's a pretty crazy comedy website, honestly, half the time. But you do get things like this. And I think during the campaigning as well, during this general election, it is going to be well worth popping in just to see what they are writing to the the parliamentary party and to really gauge what the party actually feels like. So we're going to have a look at that again today because they aren't happy. They are not happy that this national service announcement was announced. And once again, not only do you have the article, but you have the comment section below as well, because half the time, if they agree with whoever is writing the piece, then they'll all write comments saying, yes, we agree, we agree. And then sometimes if it's a bit controversial, you can go into the chat itself to see how the shall we say the normal readers would take that. Sometimes it can be incredibly positive, sometimes it can be incredibly negative, depending on what they opinion they are expressing. But the comments in this one are overwhelmingly for what Henry Hill is putting today, and his annoyance about the announcement, of course, of this particular announcement. So we're going to go have a look at what they've had to say about this. So please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page, the one foundation link called Buy Me Coffee. We can buy me coffee, the YouTube thank you button, and of course, there's the Pony Club down below as well. And of course, you can click the like and share button as well. So let's crack on into this. So this obviously over to Conservative Home. This campaign must be the nadir of government by bunker. Wow. Good, for someone who is, the flag bearer and was the headline sponsor of the last Conservative conference. Not a big vote of confidence in that. So let's begin, shall we? So yesterday, after the news broke about Michael Gove's resignation from Parliament, I was asked about the significance of the timing. Why had he waited so long to make the announcement? Was it the latest twist of the knife, somehow intended to do damage to Rishi Sunak? A lot of people were asking that question. Honestly, I think maybe Gove wanted to go. I think maybe he'd had enough. There was the infamous moment where he went to the NatCon conference where he was there, and Michael Gove looked like the most moderate person in the room. And, he was being booed by essentially, in that case, probably some people there are going to be, the future movers and shakers in the Conservative Party, even if they lose their seats, they are still going to be in the Conservative Party, rallying it from the background, fighting it out. This is why I've said even some of these figures, if they do lose their seat, they are still going to be active in the party itself. And the fight that is about to happen still incredibly influential. This is why Gove has his own Onward thing, much like Momentum, big campaign group. Onward is Michael Gove's backed initiative to try and quote save the party after this general election. So maybe he feels that him maybe remaining as an MP or staying on isn't worth it, and that actually being in the pool, shall we say, with everyone else is far, far better, because maybe he can have a lot of pull. Like I say, Michael Gove, he's a big dog. He has a lot of influence in the party still. Even if he's not an MP, he's got the Onward organization that he is very, very much backing. That will be a big, big player in the things to come. So remember the word Onward. You're going probably hearing about it quite a bit, especially after the general election. So Michael Gove, bear in mind, might be gone, not an MP anymore. He's standing down, but he's still going to be there for some time. So back to this. So one cannot rule out, of course, but much more likely, of course, was his wash-up of two of the departing Home Secretary's bills. The first of all is the Rent Reform Bill, and of course the Leasehold and Freehold Reform Bill. It's now still hung in the balance, where the Prime Minister is now made his announcement on Wednesday afternoon. So it made sense for Gove to hang around just long enough to know what his legacy would be. Lo, of course, his resignation letter that boasts of delivering a wide range of reforms to leasehold. But he obviously discreetly avoids any mention of abolishing no-fault evictions. He, of course, was thus spurred to ignominy through Sunak's inflicted on him by listing off the creation of the smoke-free generation amongst his accomplishments in office, only for the bill to fail 24 hours later. That's not, yeah, that is true. I think that is a good point. Maybe Gove stayed in there just to make sure what his legacy was going to be. Because I guarantee you, Gove now will cry about, of course, his education reforms. There's a big, obviously, big topic in debate, policy people. Were Grove's reforms actually successful when they were reforming education? Were they negative? That is in itself a big debate in those sort of political corners. So him staying behind and, of course, being the leveling up secretary, he wants to see some of these bills sort of maybe pass. And of course, if he left, then maybe these bills wouldn't have passed. So yeah, that is a fair point, actually. Maybe, staying on right to the end just to make sure that those bills did actually pass. So frankly, the losses of these pieces of this legislation is probably not going to cost many Conservatives much sleep. We have published pieces about how awful the design of the smoke-free ban was, and I've written about the steep cost of the populist crackdown on privately rented housing, sadly overtaken filleting of the great, of course, freehold robbery that is coming soon. But even with reigniting much of the merits of that case, the wash-up has now added just another fascinating dimension to the timing of this election by choosing to go now. Sunak seems to have completely dropped the guillotine on his entire legacy. Again, not a good look where your particular party leader standing for re-election and you're admitting that he has just dropped a guillotine on his entire legacy. So in his conference speech in October, he led, of course, with three policies. The smoking ban, that bill has fallen, replacing A levels and T levels with the advanced British standards. The funds apparently have not been committed. So the chances of those maybe coming through and those changing doesn't seem to be actually happening because there's no funding for it to happen. And of course, the cancelling of the HS2. The fire sale of land has barely started. And that is something that is really Labour do need to come in and sort out pretty quickly. If we are really to get HS2 really actually built, then we need to try and make sure as little of that land gets sold off as possible. If not, it's just going to be that much harder to really get the project, because you're going to almost have to go back to the drawing board in many respects to completely redraw the route and all these other things to get that land again. Obviously, anyone who bought that land is going to hold on to it and charge an arm and a leg when the government comes around for it, even when there's a compulsory purchase order maybe come on. Who knows? It just makes building HS2 that much more difficult, unfortunately. But anyway, back to this. So the Prime Minister has even gotten into trouble for abandoning Mayor's Law, a plan, of course, of freight struggling hospitality venues with a raft of new obligations, none of which would have prevented the Manchester Arena bombing. Last month, I wrote to Sunak about how he was trying to make a shortcut to a legacy, but he hasn't even seemed to take out the shortcut. So, honestly, I think that there sums up what Rishi Sunak's legacy really is going to be. Is a legacy of doing nothing. And I've called Rishi Sunak for the longest time an absolute do-nothing Prime Minister. He is the nowhere man of Prime Ministers. He's gone nowhere and he has done nothing. Ultimately, when we look back, maybe in like 10 or 15 years, you could say Boris Johnson's legacy is sort of Brexit, regardless of it be, very, very bad, of course. Ultimately, that's what Boris Johnson's going to be known for. Liz Truss, of course, is going to be still be known for that disastrous mini budget and being compared to a lettuce till now, until the end of time. I can guarantee you, if she ever, died or carked it, there would probably be a lettuce put on her grave monthly by people. That's how bad I think her reputation really has begun. Meanwhile, of course, Sunak, what's his legacy? Ultimately, one of achieving nothing, of disastrous leadership, and probably leading the Conservative Party into one of its worst historical defeats. We can but hope. And that last one. But anyway, back to this. So, meanwhile, of course, Jeremy Hunt has now been left talking a big game about inheritance tax, but without a final concrete program of actual policy offers he ought to, as a chancellor going into an election, have to be able to conjure, because of the decision to go to the country was made after his decidedly non-pre-election budget in March. So even the chancellor is now scrambling for policies. You honestly, and we'll probably find out, as I've said, in the fullness of time, just how maybe last minute this election was called. Obviously, there's still the rumors of did Rishi really believe that no confidence vote was going to happen? So he decided to jump before he was, given the push. Was this maybe the plan all along? Who knows? It's just one of those, questions. Maybe we'll find out a year from now when we get diaries, etc. And by the way, someone who is writing a diary of memoirs, which I think is probably going to be very fascinating, Michael Gove is apparently writing a diary. I'm going to be very interested in reading that, because there was someone who was a big figure in the Conservative Party, and oh my, what his experiences would have been fantastic, I think, to read and sort of dig into. But of course, back to this. So, and of course, the big policy for the 3-day campaign relaunch is national service, which the Defence Secretary completely dismissed as nonsense only back in January. There has been, of course, much ink spilled since the advent of New Labour about the decline of cabinet government, but it is hard to think of a very clear example of the very opposite: government by bunker. Then we have seen in the past year the headline conference policies, like the election, were cooked up secretly in Downing Street, and they, like the election, were complete botch jobs. Now the same thing is being played out again. What would be the consequences if an 18-year-old refused national service? We can hardly send them to prison, not while ministers are having to extend early release programs Even if the Conservative candidates do support national service in principle, they would need and deserve answers to those questions and a fully worked out policy. I made a video about this as well today. Um, it's just nonsense, and that is again a fair point. What if you do get an 18-year-old just refuses to do it? Are they going to send them to prison? Again, we thought this was quote voluntary, but are the Conservatives going to be forcing people to do that? So already this is a policy that is going to absolutely implode on impact with the real world. And it does look like barely just a couple of hours after I'm doing this, I wouldn't be surprised if the policy is completely fallen or they've said they're just going to scrap it completely by the time that this video comes out later in the week. So we'll see how quickly this implodes. But because of how long will it be before this too also implodes? Before people actually realize that only 5% of 18-year-olds could actually do the military component, and of course, not even one in actual combat roles, even if they wanted to, nor that it's obviously funded by scrapping the leveling up money. And that was something that has also been talked about, that all this leveling up money is going to be now used to fund national service. So forget leveling up the country, forget investing in all these towns and etc. That's now all going to be spent in the national service that is probably going to end up being scrapped. It just goes to show you how bad like this government honestly really has been up to this point, really has been, and that you need someone who actually has long-term thinking, long-term planning, able to look at these are the problems we're going to face. This is how we're going to do them. This is why Sue Gray wrote the that came out just a couple of days ago. These are the problems we might face in government. So we're actually trying to come up with ideas and solutions about how we solve these problems should they crop up. That in itself is forward thinking. It's the type of stuff that traditionally we would have seen, even from the Conservative Party, but not for a very long time since Boris Johnson came in. Even you could argue Cameron started this of ruling by 6-month stints. So it just goes to show you how bad ultimately this party was actually really in power over all this time. So back to this then. So maybe we'll actually peel a couple of percentage points off reform. But as I've also written elsewhere, in the medium term, reform's prospects are not too amazing. In the long term, the challenge for the party is going to be trying to regain the trust of all those generations, broadly the under 50s, who have now abandoned the party over its failures on issues such as housing, childcare, the cost of living. Some of those voters may very well recall the promise to actually conscript them or their children long after the immediate threat of Reform UK has faded. Indeed, this obviously does bear, I think, a lot of trouble, definitely deep seated into the Conservative Party. The fact that they have just failed on so much after being in power for so long, and now you're like, well, we're actually going to conscript them. Yeah, it really does not make a good look for the future of the party. That's for sure. So nostalgia for a lost golden age of the British politics is usually very unhelpful, even when it is not misinformed. But it is now increasingly clear that the weathering of the party as an institution has reached a point where it is self-destructive. Interesting now they're admitting the party at that point is self-destructing. Bear in mind, one of the reasons why we go to Conservative Home is because it has this outreach to the non-parliamentary party. If you have people who have that type of reach, have that type of influence on the non-parliamentary Conservative Party, admitting that actually it is self-destructive, or it has reached a point where it is becoming incredibly self-destructive, what does this indeed say about the future of the party, the way it might go, and the way, of course, the civil wars that are about to break out after this general election are going to go? So he finishes off with a handful of people should not have a free hand to commit an entire party to the new policies at zero notice. At least when a prime minister had to get policies through cabinet, their colleagues knew what they were going to be defending week to week. So obviously, incredibly upset about this. Um, Honestly, I don't think this bodes well for their manifesto. Um, the Conservative manifesto, I think we're gonna get probably in a couple of weeks' time, is going to be incredibly, very hurriedly written. I would not be surprised if Labour are sort of going to hold back their manifesto until the Conservatives have launched theirs, so they can't, crib any notes or any policies from it, shall we say? Wouldn't be surprised if Labour holds off releasing theirs for a while, just so that doesn't happen. But yeah, the whatever manifesto, if the one does get launched this week, is going to be, I think, thin on it's going to be this is the policy, and then it's going to be incredibly thin about any details. Um, it's not going to be fully costed out or anything like that. It is going to be, I think, really, really light, really, really dry. And then you're going to see a lot of Conservative MPs that we've already talked about, maybe releasing their own personal manifestos. And when that starts to happen, oh boy, could that be quite fun. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.